Welcome, your backup plan tribe to another awesome podcast on what's our title today? I really don't know what to say. Isn't that the truth? I am so excited for this show, everybody, because it's going to dig deep into some of you guys out there. If you are here for a reason because you might be struggling with grief. You might be struggling with someone that that we just don't know what to say to that person at that moment in time. So if you are new here, welcome to our show, Talking Taboo with Tina, brought to you by your Backup Plan app. We focus on real, raw conversations with our listeners about their journey and that life-changing event in their life. Isn't that the truth? What is your Backup Plan app? Well, your Backup Plan app puts your life all in one place in case of any unpredictable circumstance, while taking that that painful aftermath out of that tragedy to make it that what we're going to talk about today, to make that part a little bit easier. What does that mean? Well, it means that just like our wonderful guest today is going to talk about how we all are going to die at some point. We're going to get sick, we're going to get injured. And it's so very important to realize that we're not Superman and it's going to happen. So why not have some sort of plan, some plan B? Mike Tyson, the famous quote from Mike Tyson says, we are preparing, everyone has a plan until we get punched in the mouth. Isn't that the truth? We think, I have a will. Yeah, and there's like 100 other things as well on top of that. So, and we talk about all of those types of things, and the emerging blueprint, which is part of your backup plan, is going to be launched soon, talking about worksheets and interviews with accountants and lawyers and attorneys, and it's brought to you on a general aspect, and we'll dig deeper as time goes on into, say, what happens in the UK and what happens in Australia. What does it look like in United States? What does it look like in Canada? All of these different points of views. It's really going to step it up a notch for each individual from wherever that you are struggling and you want to get that backup plan completed. So my name is Tina Ginn. I have the Talking Taboo show with Tina, emergency preparedness coach, a best-selling author of In the Blink of an Eye. Yes, things happen that quickly. I'm a financial expert and an app developer of your Backup Plan app. I'm right here in Vancouver, BC, and I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to our channel. I'm super happy that you're here today to listen to our show and subscribe. I get my hand out. Subscribe to that button down there. Let's get that hand out and click on that bell and that subscribe button so that you get notified of any upcoming shows that you won't want to miss. I'd like to welcome our United States and Canada and UK visitors and listeners. And I'd love to actually welcome my German listeners, which is one of the third top listeners of our channel, of our shows. Meine deutsche Freunde sind in unserem Podcast willkommen. Wenn Sie Kommentare haben, können Sie gern Fragen stellen. Also danke für deine Freundschaft. Also danke für deine Freunde. Let's get this party started. We found you. You found us, we found you. You're here for a reason. You have to hear something that one of us says to you. It might trigger something. You might want to share this with a friend or someone else struggling with grief. Our special guest today is an advanced grief recovery specialist brought to you from beautiful England. Her name is Dr. Victoria Wilson Crane. She supports children and adults grieving life losses. Her memoir and her self-help book, 16 Days, published in January 2022 this year, provides advice for those supporting others in shock and grief following a sudden death. Let's go ahead and bring on beautiful Vic. Hi, Vic.
Hi, Tina. Thank you for having me today. Really nice to
Oh,
see
I'm
you.
I'm so excited to have you talk about. Unfortunately, it's not a good thing that we have to talk about, but it also helps. You say things are for a reason. I guess things are for a reason. Things happen. Vic is an educational innovator and leader. She used her academic writing skills, and love of words as therapy as she faced significant grief in 2020. Vic lives in South Yorkshire, England, with her author husband, Roger. They share their life and sense of humor with their dance crazy daughter, Holly Mae. I love that name. And their exuberant, unique, yet typically bonkers, flat coated retriever, Ted Hastings. Oh my goodness. Oh, I'd love to see Ted Hastings. That's a wonderful name. Sounds like you should have a children's book soon, too.
Well, there's a story in there actually, and that's kind of where I started with my writing before I began writing my other book. So he is going to have a book coming out very shortly, definitely.
Oh, that's awesome. I'd
Thank
love to
you.
see. Do you have him on Instagram or anything?
He's not made an appearance just yet. There are some photographs of him, but I've got a cover I can share with you of my book. Hastings Helps. Yes.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Well, Vic, that's your introduction for a beautiful story that I know you're going to be telling everyone. Where did it all start for you?
Yeah. Where did it begin? So. Just over 2 years ago, our rather small family experienced the really sudden death of a really young member of our family, my young niece, who was only 22. Um, it all happened very suddenly. She was unwell with typical sort of flu-like symptoms. She had a fever and cold and headaches, those kind of things. Um, she was taken to hospital, and in hospital they identified that she had encephalitis, which is a brain inflammation. And it's one of those things that's really quite rare, but when it happens, it's really quite serious as well. It is possible to recover from encephalitis, but that wasn't the case for my niece, unfortunately. So
Is
within
it
about a week.
is it dependent on when they catch it, do you think, or what is it
No, it's
based on?
the variant that we think my niece had was some sort of autoimmune. So she was quite she had allergies. She was allergic to some foods, and we don't know whether there was some connection between some sort of allergic reaction and her body just kind of went into overdrive and recognized this virus and wanted to attack it, and then really attacked itself.
How
So
many days do you think she had that then?
probably about 3 or 4 maximum, really.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
she was she was poorly with the virus for about a week before, and then she was in hospital from the Saturday, and then she died on the Monday. So all happened incredibly quickly. And although we knew that she was seriously poorly, no one expected that she was going to die. My kind of worst case scenario was that there was probably going to be quite a long recovery from the illness that she had, and in my mind, I had some vague plans about how we might be able to support that recovery. But sadly, that wasn't to be, and she died. As I say, she was only 22. She was studying at the time. She was doing a postgraduate course following a law degree that she'd taken. So, to everybody's mind, the future was really quite bright for her.
Yeah.
So to be facing that with someone so young and with so much potential um, was just, yeah, not what any of us were expecting a
Yeah.
couple of years ago.
Can you tell us how that felt for you? How did that feel when you're not expecting, I think when they tell you it's bad, but
Mhm.
you don't really expect that.
No, and there was definitely that element of just the shock, which probably carried me through a number of days following her death. Really, just shock and disbelief. And I think the only thing that started to make that more real was the communication that I was involved in at that stage to try and tell people, because the number of times that you play that over and you tell the story, and I still tell the story now, and that's probably why I'm here today, because I still feel like I want to tell that story. That does make it a little bit more real and does help you understand. But yeah, just total shock, and shock like I've never felt before. So nothing in the bag, no tools to be able to deal with any of this, no preparation at all. And then as with your theme, total taboo, because people do not talk about death and dying.
Yeah.
So added to that, there was what felt like a complication of, how do we even talk about this? How do we begin to talk about this? And even if we started to feel comfortable talking about that, people receiving that news were very uncomfortable hearing that news
As
and didn't
well.
know how to react. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. And then it makes us awkward.
Mm.
You're saying something and it's awkward for them, and they don't know what to say back, and it's awkward for you, and it's like this whole
Yeah, and everyone wants to help, and with no exception, everybody has got everyone's best interests at heart and is trying to help, but we definitely fumble around and can't speak directly about it, talk in euphemisms a lot and don't really use the words.
Yeah.
I know some members of my family, struggling with the terminology, talking about a coffin and talking about a grave and stuff like that was very, very difficult to even have those kind of conversations. So at the speed that you have to work in that time, because you have to make some decisions, that also adds another layer of complication if you're not used to talking about those things.
And I think it's even worse after the fact. It's hard to do it beforehand. I have to admit, and that's why people don't do it. But as I mentioned to you, we have worksheets with your backup plan.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good to do them ahead of time and talk about these things when nothing is wrong. Even though we don't want to do it, but hey, we try and have fun doing it. Sure. Because it's sure 100 times harder after.
Mm-hmm. If you've never had any of those conversations, if you just haven't spoken about it, absolutely.
Yeah. And who would for a 22-year-old?
No, not expected at all. So yeah, so the story really was around how I think we coped and managed to get through the stuff that we had to get through. And I think partly for me, it was around that element of I was incredibly close to my niece. I was her aunt, but I was incredibly close to her. But there were people that were closer than me. So she had 2 sets of parents and brothers and a boyfriend. I quite quickly realised that I wasn't the closest. And I describe it in my writing of, she's at the centre of this, and then outside there are some layers, and then there's some further layers further out. And I was in one of those layers and one of those rings, definitely, but I wasn't the closest. So trying to take on that role of being the supporter as well as desperately needing support myself was possibly the most challenging. And as you said, having no plans in place, having not had conversations before about any sort of wishes or plans, makes that all incredibly difficult.
Yeah. But luckily you said you didn't fight and no one fought, which could happen easily.
Yeah, no, we didn't. And I think, and none of this was done kind of with any planning, but we were just quite pragmatic about what needed to be done. And fortunately, we didn't end up overlaying the enormous amount of stress that we already had with further stress that we were in control of, because I think there's a sense of feeling incredibly out of control at that point, that very little of it is within your control. So there's actually a story around my dad, because he's in his 70s and comes from a generation where we just don't talk about our feelings so much. No. And we had an enormous argument one evening, which was over a meal that I was cooking, and he decided to adapt it beyond what I wanted him to do, and we had a big row about this, and none of it was about the food. But it was just a way, at least, of us both expressing that we were both under immense stress. And it was horrible at the time, but it was possibly good that we had that conversation, because then afterwards we were able to have a real conversation about what was really going on for both of us. But we weren't really having, there weren't tussles or arguments about what we needed to do for the best for my niece, really, which was a positive thing.
Yeah.
And I would really try and avoid that if you possibly can, because, as I say, there's enough stress, there's enough worry, without generating even more. But I totally understand, particularly if you've got bigger families and families that maybe are not as cordial as ours. I can understand how that happens, and everybody's on a heightened state as well. And I think that really is what had happened with my dad and I, that we were both incredibly stressed. And it came out over something very, very trivial that in normal times we would have not have fallen out over.
Yeah.
So it
You
is
don't
just sort of
realize what
recognizing
it
that.
does. It's like it
No.
turns your skin inside out.
Oh, that's an interesting way to describe it, because we know what our skin is, but to turn it inside out, that's something completely alien and completely unusual.
But that's what I
Yeah.
feel like you're in when you're
Mm,
in this weird.
yeah, it is. And all habits and routines go out the window as well. All whatever's normal. And then I think with the timing of my niece as well, the whole world's then changed from what we knew as normal, because this happened in the middle of January. Once we'd had her funeral at the end of January, the world started to look a slightly different place than it had been before. So that itself added another dimension to the kind of weirdness of everything that was going
Impact
on.
that it made.
Yeah.
What do you think you felt when you went into the hospital and they said, I mean, I hate to bring this up, but it brings up feelings of, what do you think was your first? I mean, what do people think of at first? How do you think that first thought was in your mind?
I was actually incredibly confused, because fortunately we had a member of our extended family who was supporting my mum at the time, and we were receiving the news that actually there was no more that they were going to be able to do for her, and we had to start to move to understand that she was effectively dying. And it was actually my niece's boyfriend's mum who did a beautiful thing, but a very confusing thing for me at the time, because she was trying to soften it for my mum and was saying, oh, that there might be hope, there may be things they can do. And I remember saying to my sister, what on earth is going on? Because I thought I heard her say that this is game over, and I didn't want to hear that. And I
Yeah.
was hearing this, close family member saying, "Oh, there's possibly hope," and I just remember saying, "Can someone tell me what is going on here?" Because even when you think you've communicated very clearly, either people can misunderstand, or people can choose to not take that on straight away for all
Mhm.
good reason. So I think my first emotion was just initial confusion. And then secondly, because I very shortly then went into the ward and went to see my niece who was in the intensive care. And I think that led to even more confusion, because you kind of expect, because I've unfortunately had family members who've been unwell for a period of time and they've died and they've declined, and you've observed that, and your brain sometimes then can start to process that, because you can see they're not as they normally looked.
Mhm.
But to all intents and purposes, apart from all the equipment and the fact that she was in such a very serious place and getting such high care and attention, she looked so normal. Her breathing rate, because a machine was doing that for her, was normal. She even had vaguely rosy cheeks. She
Mhm.
looked normal. And to try and understand that was just so confusing, because
To
you
your
just think,
eyes, to your eyes.
yeah, exactly. See, at any point, you just think someone's going to go, we had you there, we were just kidding, just seeing how you'd react. And obviously that wasn't going to happen. But yeah, I think confusion probably was the most overwhelming emotion at the time, because it was just firstly hearing that news and thinking, right, okay, got to try and start to understand this, but that's not what I was expecting. And then it doesn't quite compute with the image that you have in front of you. And that there may be guests who are listening this evening who perhaps they've had someone who's been unwell and you've been able to watch that, or unfortunately perhaps there's been some sort of accident where there is something visible that you can see that helps you understand that actually this person is quite gravely ill. There was little of that I could observe. So I think, just total confusion was the first thought. And then when we did move to the kind of communication steps and trying to tell people, that was vaguely helpful, because it was then an opportunity to reiterate the story and to explain it to people in different ways, and to explain it to people who were at different levels of understanding. There were some people that I spoke to who knew she'd been unwell and knew she was in hospital, who knew she was in intensive care and knew that possibly this could be an outcome. And they were quite straightforward. There were other people who didn't know anything that had gone on at all.
Yeah.
And they were much more difficult conversations, because trying to start that with, I've got some news and it's not good news. And
I don't know if you know or not. Like, right?
No, exactly. And most of these conversations were over the phone, and you can't see people face to face, so you can't hug them and touch them and do all the natural things that you would do to try and help them with that. So I think, although there's a chapter in my book that says, the day I became the director of strategic communications, it was never the plan to have to do that, but actually, in a strange sort of way, it was vaguely helpful, because it meant that I had a job to do to tell quite a large number of people what had happened, and the story got a little bit easier vaguely as time went on, because I got a bit better at sensing what their reaction might be, how much detail that they wanted people to go into, because most people's reaction, which is totally human and natural, is to ask what on earth happened, what went on. And the first time you're asked that, again, you're not rehearsed, so you don't really know what to say, and you don't know what they're going to understand, and you don't know what you're going to feel like you want to talk about. So once you get a few into that, you sort of get your confidence up a little bit in terms of what you're actually saying and how you're sharing it. I did make some mistakes, definitely, and did misread some of those conversations, and had some really sort of shocking, upset reactions from people, as you can imagine. But as time went on, it was slightly easier the more I told people about this, because it just starts to become reality for you.
Yeah, I think because you didn't have it reality at first, right? So by the more times you say it out loud, your brain is now taking it in each time.
Definitely. Yeah.
So I guess it helps you in some ways as well. But it's
I think so.
Who determined, once this kind of happened, there's so many things to think about and do.
Here's something I found on the web. According
Alexa,
to
she's joined in.
Be quiet.
Has she got any advice for us?
Alexa, do you have any advice for us?
If your cup is always half full, you should complain to the waiter.
Okay.
Oh gosh.
Oh.
Yes. I don't even know what to say to that. Oh jeez. Good timing.
Good timing, definitely.
I think, like, you have the answer. You have this, all of a sudden she's gone. But how does everybody, like, okay, what do we do? What do we need to do? And who's doing it? Like, that's such a hard conversation to all of a sudden do when everybody has all of these heightened emotions.
Yeah, and I don't think I have any answers to that, really. We had a couple of people in the family that we knew it was important that we got a message to quite quickly, and one of the concerns around that was around social media, because you will have seen it, I'm sure, and I'm sure your listeners will have seen it. when people make those sorts of announcements on social media. And it's a great way to hit people quickly and possibly try to make sure that you don't have a situation where some people know and some people don't know. But I actually think it's quite a difficult way to communicate, because it's a broadcast and there's no chance for anybody to ask any questions. It's a very shocking thing to see. And again, if any of your listeners or even yourself, if you've ever read that, is, there's a kind of sharp intake of breath. And then there's also the, what do I do now?
Yeah.
I've been
What
told
message? Do you send a message? Do you call?
exactly.
Like, what do you do?
Yeah, do I reply? Do I not reply? Do I put a heart if it's on Facebook, or do I what do I do? So I actually think, while social media, and I use social media in lots of areas of my life, I don't think it's a great tool for this sort of communication, because I think it's important both for the person and in my case, communicating the news, but for the recipient as well. It's really, really challenging, because you're left with a feeling of, probably, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to say, because that's probably one of the first natural things that we have.
Yeah.
But where do you go next? Because you can't even gauge where the person who's posted that is, or where their head's at. So I would really encourage people to just think really carefully about, and particularly if you're on this kind of outer circle as well, it might not be your news to share. Just be really careful that if you are going to share that people are confident that it's okay to put that out there. We were a little bit concerned about an elderly relative of ours who is quite tech savvy, and lives on her own. And I just thought, I don't want her reading about this on Facebook. It's a very shocking thing to see about
Yeah.
anybody, and definitely not about your close relative. So yeah, I think around the communication, it's about thinking about the recipient as well. One of my friends who I wanted to tell, and actually she'd been bridesmaid with my niece at our wedding. She's a very close family friend. I really wanted to tell her on the evening that my niece had died, but actually she lives on her own, and I thought, that's not fair to
Oh,
ring her at 9-10
no.
o'clock at night with that news. I won't do that. I did speak to her quite early the following morning, and she hadn't anticipated this. She'd known she was unwell, but she didn't know it was going to come to this, as nobody did. And she was very upset. And I've never actually asked her whether that was the right thing to do, but I just thought, rather than speed, it's probably better that I tell you at a time when you can then speak to other people, and you'll be going into work and you'll be seeing other people, rather than me just kind of thinking, right, quickly tick off the list, need to kind of get that done.
Yeah. Well, that's really good tips, because I know some people don't even, I think you should probably, whoever's looking after the communication part of it, to think about who do they tell personally, and then put something broadcasted out after, right?
Yeah, that's right. We actually, with my niece, it was 10 days afterwards before a post went on Facebook, and we were able to really consider what was included in that. And obviously at that stage, the funeral was planned, and we had some news and arrangements for people if they wanted to attend, and that was helpful. The other thing we also did was we asked for no comments, because I'm quite introverted, and I actually find that onslaught of communication quite challenging. And I just thought, we don't need hundreds, and it would have been hundreds of people commenting, that puts pressure on them for you to feel like you have to respond. And it was great that people observed that. We set up a private email account, and a few of us of the family had access to that, and we just said, if there's anything you would like to say or ask, or photos you'd like to share, please use that. And people did, and it was lovely, because then in our own pace we could go on there and have a look and respond to people again at our own time. But rather than having the phone pinging all the time with very well-meaning people, very supportive people, but maybe not the right time for you to receive it. So that was actually really helpful as well.
That's a really good tip as well. Since our whole life is different now with social media, and how do you talk and how do you tell anybody? And I know this year I've had quite a few Facebook posts of people passing away.
Mm.
And by the time I see it, you ask, is there going to be anything? You'd like to make sure that you go, or you bring something to them with some food or something.
Yeah.
You want to reach out, but by the time you sometimes see the post, I saw it and they had already had some sort of celebration,
Yeah.
so then you kind of feel like you're left out.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a hard thing to maneuver around.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
What did you find with your family to there's so many things to find about a young person, all their social media accounts,
Mm.
and I guess she didn't have a will, so there's all of that kind of stuff to delve through.
Yeah.
What does someone looking after that, or a group of you, or?
Yeah, we just sort of took our time with it really, and a lot of that was her mum to deal with that. So her social media accounts have actually remained open, and that's been of some comfort because we can tag her in things, or we can then post things on her wall. We did have access to passwords, whether that's right or wrong, but we did.
Oh, that's
So
great.
that was an easy way to make sure that we could handle some of that for sure. But it's the longer term sort of ripple effect of the things that you sign up for that you perhaps don't use very often, that just sort of pop up after a certain amount of time. So I know that my sister, her mum, was dealing with some of that for some considerable time really. I think if we're going to learn anything from that, and something I've taken away from that, is to at least have a list of where my kind of digital presence is, so that
Yes,
when the time comes, somebody knows where to get that.
that's right.
I have followed the instructions on Facebook in terms of what to do in the event of something happened to me, and that's something I've done in light of this as well. So I think there are definitely lessons to learn, because there are so many things now that you sign up for and log
Yeah.
into, and they've
Yeah.
got your information.
And there's
So
so
yeah.
many digital assets out there, actually, like
Yeah.
I call even having a blog an asset,
Yeah.
because maybe she started a blog and she would have thought, maybe she wanted you as her aunt to continue it. People can have any sort of idea or concept, but unless you have that conversation beforehand, you don't really know what it is that they probably never thought of it or gave it any thought. And it was good that you had all the passwords, because that is horrible, trying to get through that mess.
Yeah, and for good reason. Those organisations don't let you very easily or quickly, despite your story, get access to any of that. So yeah, totally understandable. But it has made me more mindful about how I deal with my own
That's
assets,
right.
my own website and stuff like that, because
That's right.
I wouldn't want to leave that complication behind me. But I probably would never have thought about that. And
No.
actually, if you have elderly relatives, and I'm being very stereotypical, but elderly relatives who have fewer of those kind of digital assets, you're probably not going to learn a lesson from that. It's only from kind of younger people, or people that do have that kind of presence, that you're going to see it. And I think probably one of the most upsetting things is when stuff is taken down when you can't access it, and things that you want to retain that you're not able to. So to have a bit of a plan around that is useful. Maybe things like backups, cloud backups, Dropboxes, those kinds of things where photos and videos are going to be stored. That would give a degree of comfort when you're at a stage where you're just thinking, I don't want to erase anything about her time here.
Yeah.
And people keep physical assets, and keep belongings, but actually some of those digital assets are really, really important. They're an important part of her story. So yeah, I think of lessons learned around this is to try and make sure your nearest and dearest know how to access those things.
Yes. And of course, in the app, it makes it simple. It's taken that, like I say to small business owners as well, and they might have a book, or you might have a website, or you might have a blog, or you might have a YouTube channel. Well, what happens if you aren't here tomorrow?
Mm.
What do you want to have happen with that?
Sure.
Because it's not, I bring it always back to a client that I have that collects fire trucks. Imagine, like, you'd never ever think of fire trucks, but it's so unique and so different. If he was to leave, 20 or 25 of his valuable fire trucks to his wife or in family, what do they do with that? How do they know its value? How do they know who to contact? How do they know what to do with it? How do you make decisions around that? You can't just sell it on Craigslist and
No.
hope that you're going to get the right amount of money for
Value
it.
for it. Yeah, that's true.
Right. So it's so many different things that people get involved in their life, and it complicates matters to a degree of, well, what do you want done with that
Yes. Yeah.
when the time comes? And it could be a sickness even, where you can't talk anymore, or you're on an oxygen tank for a while or something. I mean, who knows? Who knows? But thank goodness she had that happen before the COVID time, because that, I have interviewed quite a few people who couldn't have those celebrations after. And that's another problem, I think, that we're going to experience in generations.
It is, because as awful and dreadful as it was, to have the idea that we wouldn't have the chance to be together as a family during that time. We wouldn't have the chance to spend. And I, again, sort of in terms of feelings, when we walked into the venue that we booked for the wake after the funeral, it was just really quite overwhelming, because there were just so many people from different bits of my life and different bits of my sister's life, and but to think that we maybe couldn't have had that, and it perhaps might have been 12 of us, and I might not even part of the 12 because I might not have made the shortlist. The idea of that is just, it's just unbearable, and what those families have gone through in those times, I'm sure it's going to have some sort of longer term impact. Because at the very, very least, we were able to spend that immediate time together. It wasn't that helpful in the months to come, because we weren't able to be together as a family, and it was really quite challenging last summer when, for us anyway, in the UK, everything started to open up again, and people were able to there was much more freedom, and many people were saying, "Oh, isn't it great because we can get back to normal and we can do normal things?" And I just remember thinking, but there's not going to be a normal ever again, really. There'll be some degree of normality, but it won't be ever the normal we remembered. And I found that quite challenging at the time, because I didn't know how to behave. I'd been able to hide in my little I've conducted most of my business from this room for the last 2 years, so very challenging to think that there was an expectation that we were suddenly going to be normal again, because what even is that? But as you say, at least we did have that opportunity to spend time together as a family, which I know many families didn't get that opportunity for, all over the world.
Yeah. So tell us about the things that you had to talk about in this communication job that you got handed. What to say and what to say back. That's just such a huge problem for most people.
It is, and that really is the premise of my book, really, because so many people, their sort of instant response was, "I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say." To which I'd say, "There's nothing you can say, is there?" And that possibly would be the end of the conversation. But I would start, and actually, I remember this from well before my niece died, actually, that when the worst happened to somebody, the chance of you saying something that's going to make it any worse is probably quite limited. So just go out right on ahead and say something. You're probably not going to make it any worse. Now, a couple of people had a good go, but mostly you're not going to make it any worse. And I think, for me, probably the most challenging thing was when people said nothing at all. And that idea of people either metaphorically or physically sort of crossing the road to avoid you, or not wanting to talk to you because they can't find the words, which I totally understand, and I've been in that situation myself. But that can be just so much harder, because as the grieving person, I think you're kind of expecting someone to say something at some stage. So you see somebody, they don't say something in the first 5 minutes, so you're not really focusing on what they're saying, because all you're thinking of is, when's it going to come, when they're going to say something. And then when they don't say something, it can be quite infuriating and quite it can make you quite sort of cross, really, that how can you not recognize that this has happened? And it's possibly because people have forgotten, because people have got their own lives, and let's face it, our own lives have been so mixed up in these last 2 years, so you can forgive people for being preoccupied with whatever it is they've been trying to deal with, because everyone's had a lot on their plates. But this idea that people have just they're just getting on with their own lives, when my life just isn't going on the same way as I expected. That sort of idea of I really don't know what to say. I think if there is any advice in that, I would say probably try and avoid the phrases around comparing. Oh, I know what it's like because I lost my ex, because it's very difficult to really put yourself in someone else's shoes. You don't really know how they feel. So any sort of sense of I know just how you feel, although that sounds empathetic, that actually,
it hurts.
Yeah, because how on earth do you know how I feel? You've not even asked me how I feel, and yet you're telling me how I feel.
That's the first thing that it's like, you don't know how I feel.
Don't know. No, you don't. I don't know how I feel half the time, so I don't know how you can know how I feel. Can certainly be part of that.
And you didn't even like your husband anyway, so what are you talking about?
And then, I mean, there wasn't so much of this, but I know it can happen, when people start a sentence with "at least," that's probably not going to go anywhere positive. At least they had a good innings, they say about people who are old. At least it was quick. That's no comfort to me.
No.
So,
and they're
anything
still gone. It doesn't matter,
exactly,
right?
they're not coming back. So if you do ever feel tempted to start a phrase with "at least," maybe just check yourself over that one, because that probably isn't going to end in a good way. I think the most helpful things that people did for me was just really be present and listen. Listen when I wanted to repeat myself, listen when I got confused, listen when I said things over and over again. Keep offering to listen when I pushed you away. It's probably one of the hardest, because you sometimes just don't need whatever effort somebody is making. It's just not what you're after. So keep
especially
showing up.
in the moment, like for every day. One day they could say it and you don't want to hear it, and tomorrow it's fine. So
yeah, and I think that's it. I think it is so subject to change that we're not on some sort of linear, neat path through this grief. It's very messy and very complicated, and therefore, even asking me how I am is a difficult question to answer. But if you ask me how I am this morning, or how is it feeling for me today, that's an easier question for me to try and pass. It wasn't something we did, but it's definitely something in my reading, and I might adopt this should the need arise again. I know some people use a scale, so they might, it's just a kind of like language between each other. I'm on a 6 today, or I'm on a 3 today, and we would know what that would mean without having to say, I feel utterly dreadful and wretched, because that's really what you want to say. So that can sometimes be helpful if you are close enough to the person to say, can we have a bit of a code word of what that means?
That's really helpful, because it's easier to say I'm a 3 than go into why you feel like a 3.
Exactly. And just say I'm a 3, and that's all you need to know, because a 3 needs a certain response from me, or a 6 needs a certain response from me. I don't really need to know why you're feeling like that, or if that's going to remain either. My sister and I were in text messages, we would would use the inverted commas and we'd say, we're okay, because that would mean I'm up and breathing and I'm all right, but I'm not really all right, but I'm okay.
On the outside.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because it's hard to kind of get gradations of how that awfulness feels, really, because all you really want to say is right now and for the foreseeable future, I'm really not great. But there are some times when when you're feeling lighter than others, so it's quite useful to express that. So some of those could be useful things to bear in mind when you're thinking
Absolutely.
about communicating.
What do you think the nicest thing was that someone said to you?
Not so much said, but did. And probably the most helpful thing that one of my work colleagues did and continues to do, to be honest, is just very, very regularly check in. And she doesn't need to choose her words now, because I know exactly what her intentions are. But very, very regularly, I'd either have a text or a phone call, and it wasn't sort of 8 o'clock every morning, or it wasn't as predictable as that, but it was just that thought that somebody's actually out there for me and looking out for me. And she knew our extended family a little bit, but I did just feel that she was there for me, and that's what I needed at the time. So it was just knowing I had someone there, and knowing that we'd had enough conversations that she would be okay if I wasn't okay. And she wasn't the person who was asking how I was to then not be able to cope if I was saying, I'm actually not all right today, this is not good. And knowing you have just one person is enough of that, but a few people like that is such a comfort, because for many other bits of your life, and again, thinking about sort of me and my kind of outer circle, I was back at work, I was functioning, I was doing what I needed to do
The regular
on
life.
the surface. Yeah. I just needed somebody who was there, who knew that was all a bit of a cover, really, and there was a lot going on underneath that. So that was possibly the most helpful. And then I think in terms of practical things people did, in those very early days, anybody that brought food or did laundry or dealt with the incoming mail or did any of those very practical things that just go out of the window.
Take the garbage out.
Yeah. Or somebody said recently, take the dog for a walk, or do things like that. Just help out with the things that you just normally do on autopilot, that A, you don't have time to do when there's an awful lot to plan, and B, you either don't feel like it or your routines have gone out the window. So anybody that can help with things like that. So again, I would say a really helpful thing is to make very practical offers of things that you're going to do. And perhaps don't frame it as in, just ask me if you need anything, because you don't want to ask.
No.
I'm an independent person. I'm used to doing things for myself. I don't want to have to ask for something. But somebody who shows up and says, I'm going to bring you a shepherd's pie and I'm going to bring you out at 7 o'clock.
An apple pie or something.
Yeah, and do that is great. And that's insanely helpful. And I'd never thought about that before, because again, I think I was brought up with the idea of don't bother people, they've got plenty on, they've got stuff to do, and they're very busy and they're very very upset. But actually, it was so nice seeing people, even fleetingly, doing practical things like that was just so helpful.
Oh, that's awesome. I find I'm a hugger, so the first thing I would say is, can I hug you? Because there's nothing better than, what words need to be said?
Yeah, that's right. And if it's you'll know what that relationship is like with that person, whether it's appropriate to hold their hands or whether to hug them. Very, very comforting when it's when it's in the right place, definitely. So yeah, you'll know, and hopefully you'll know if the recipient isn't a hugger as well, and that's not what they need. But yeah, offer that.
Who doesn't need a hug?
We're a bit more reserved in the UK, a little bit more reserved. Not everybody does.
But once you do, there's no turning back.
That's right.
That's what I found with people in softball when we'd hug them, and some people just don't like to be hugged and they find it very weird, but once you do it a few times, they're like, they're all over it, like they want to do it more.
You've converted them.
I wanted to talk about your book a little bit more.
Sure.
Can you
Yeah,
show us
so
your book?
yeah, I can. Yeah, so I would say part of my therapy really was to write my book. So
16
um,
days. It's
it's called 16
beautiful.
Days, and that name it came from there were 16 days between my niece's death and her funeral, basically, and some unusual things happened in terms of the support that we got from people and the things that I ended up having to do, which I never envisaged at all. Um, and as part of my recovery, really, I started to write it down. And then I got involved with a coach in the UK, mainly around my work, because I'm an academic and I wanted to get my voice out there a little bit more in terms of my work. And he suggested that I joined he had a pop-up group coming up called Write That Book. And I said, I don't want to write a book, though. I'm not interested in writing a book. And he said, no, you're missing the point. It's more to do with general communication. It will be good for you. So I did join Write That Book, and I did plan to write my book about my dog, which is what I mentioned earlier. But actually, the lovely community that I became part of as part of the masterclass that came from the pop-up group with Michael Heppel, the coach, was just so warm and welcoming that I thought my dog book can wait, because from a cathartic point of view, I need to get this story off my chest. I need to talk about this. So I decided to write 16 days, and it's not a diary by any stretch, but it's just a number of chapters around communication, around practical things that people can do. And at the time, I was doing quite a lot of reading myself, because again, with an academic background, that's the first thing you do. Let's find a book. Somebody must have written about this. How do we deal with sudden death? But a lot of the stuff that I was facing was suggesting that there was more trouble on the horizon. Sudden death, you have families are fractured, you have a high incidence of divorce, separation when someone's died suddenly, because of the kind of aftershocks and the
The
impact of
mess.
that.
The
Yeah, and
mess.
I thought that's really not that helpful. We've had enough trauma. I could do without any more. So some of the books there were incredibly helpful in terms of how to talk to people and how to do that. So at the end of each chapter, where appropriate, there's a little bit of advice that either comes from the reading or comes from just my own experience of how I think people can feel a bit more confident. And the subtitle of the book is A Sudden Death, What to Say, because back to my starting point, people just generally don't know what to say and don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of writing the book, I did some training with the Grief Recovery Institute and became an advanced grief recovery specialist. And that again helped me to put into perspective some of the work that I've been doing. And I've now been working with clients to help them with their own grief. And that's an evidence-based program, and you go through a number of steps to help you heal from losses, not necessarily from bereavement alone, but from other losses too. So
There are
I found some of
many,
the absolutely
many
well,
losses.
yeah, the method suggests that over 40 different life losses can lead to grief reactions in us, and then unresolved grief can be cumulative. So if you don't deal with it, then it's just going to build up and build up. So yeah, it's been quite a learning journey, really, which I totally didn't anticipate this time 2 years ago. But
No.
quite rewarding. The book's been quite well received, and people have been very positive about some of the things that I've written in the book. And then beyond that, the training with the grief recovery, I'm now working directly with clients, which is interesting, and kind of building up my knowledge as well about how to support people who are grieving.
And it feels so good, doesn't it, when you're grieving yourself, to feel like you're helping other people?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I definitely think this has changed me, which I anticipated, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's changed me for the better, but I've probably used some of that learning, and if that then helps one or two more people feel a bit more confident and know what to say, rather than be in the situation that I know I would have been in if I'd have been somebody listening to my story.
Yeah.
I would have been floundering. I would have said, I don't know what to say. I would have said, I'm here for you if you need me. Give me a call if you need me. And while none of that is
Bad.
damaging, it's not as helpful as it could be. And just sort of developing that a bit further can make life much easier from the griever's perspective. Certainly from my experience.
And from the grieving perspective, when someone says that to you, but then a week later you do reach out and say something, but they're in their own world,
Mhm.
and so they're not responding back to the way you took that statement, because they're not really there. They're not present in the moment. They're not getting the gist of what you're saying. Does
Mm,
that make sense?
absolutely. Yeah.
That's where I
And
find it difficult, because they say it, but do they really mean
they
it?
really mean it. Yeah. And I can see myself on both sides of that. I can recognize myself pre this experience. But hopefully I can recognize myself where I am now, and having a bit more empathy and understanding about what practically you can do, because I do genuinely think that although grief is very unique, and every loss is unique, there probably are some practical things that will work in most situations to help people.
Yeah.
And that's been the premise of the book, really.
Yeah, because I think when someone does say that, it's just kind of, what is that called? There's a saying for that, when they just blow air. You know what I mean?
Mm,
It's
yeah,
just,
yeah, just hot
let me
air.
know if you
Yeah.
need anything or if I can help out. Because
Mm,
when you do ask them for help, they're not there.
mm,
So your actions are really what means something.
yeah.
So, like you said, it might be better if they turn that statement around and said, how about I'll check in with you on the end of the week and I'll bring you some dinner for the weekend or
Mhm.
something.
Yeah.
Like, just start doing something. Do what
Yeah.
you say you're going to do, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Those sort of concrete actions do then help you get a bit of confidence about what that person is either able to do. And let's face it, you don't always get it back from the people that either you expect it from, or that you would like it from either.
No, isn't that
So
the truth?
it's sometimes people that show up who you wouldn't have ever thought in a million years. Um, and that's beautiful as well. That's really nice. And I when that happens, try to focus on that rather than focus on what you're missing, because
Yeah.
you don't know what's happening in the other person's life that means they just can't show up for you at that time, and that's okay. But that was quite a
Lesson.
quite sort of, yeah, and quite revealing, really, in terms of what people were capable of doing and what they were capable of giving at that time.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very true. Do you have any final messages for the listeners? Even though I don't want to stop talking.
No, I know. I could continue talking. Um, I think if just two things, really. I think if you are in a situation where you are in need of support, please know that there is support out there, and there's kind of the emergency support of phone lines and that type of thing, that people will there, and that they'll listen to you. And then there's more longer term support. And having found the grief recovery method myself, um, it was useful to just know that there are some action steps that you can take that are evidence based and can demonstrate that they can help you feel better. So there are ways to feel better if you are in grief at the moment, and to know that people are behind you, and people are with you if you are feeling like that. And if you're on the other side of that and you're there to support, maybe some of the things we've talked about this evening could be helpful for you, just in terms of being a little bit more confident and knowing what to say and do. And I think some of the major outtakes are, as we've just covered off, really around practical, concrete things. Don't promise more than you can deliver, but if
Hmm.
you say you'll do something, make sure you do
You
that,
do.
and do show up. So yeah, but I think if your listeners are in either of those camps, they're not difficult. They're not easy positions to be in. It's difficult times, but know there's people there really to support you.
Now, you have a Facebook group that I've linked down below, as well as your book and your website.
Sure.
What do you do on the Facebook group? Do you have conversations around this?
Yeah, we do. So the Facebook group was really launched around the book, and it's to try and help people. So many books that I've read. I've got a big shelf of books down here of number of things that I've read, and I've just been sharing some of the main quotes and some of the outtakes from some of those books lately, and they've sparked quite a bit of conversation around things like I genuinely think that in a lot of cases it's useful to talk about this, but I know it's not going to suit everybody. So we had a little bit of a chat around that last week, because there was a quote, excuse me, from somebody saying that it's really important to talk. There's also just some nice heartwarming quotes that help you feel like you're not quite so alone as well. And then I'm also just sharing some of the backstories behind the book, because while the book is a memoir, so it's kind of the story behind the story anyway, there are some additional pieces there as well, so it helps people know a little bit more about that. So you'll find out a little more about that.
And your workshop as well, right? That is that off of your website that you have a workshop going?
Yeah, absolutely. So if anybody is interested in knowing more about the grief recovery method, I'm more than happy to have a no obligation conversation, and that can be booked from my website. All of that work is done online, so I can work wherever and whenever. And the program itself is an 8-week program, which involves some face-to-face work like this online, and then some homework to do with the client as well. So I'd be happy to explain much more about that if you'd like to have a one-to-one conversation.
Oh, that's awesome. And I know it's going to help so many people. There's just so many people struggling with this. You know, it turns into so many other things, or you can let it turn into depression and who knows what other health
Absolutely.
problem, right?
Yeah. And grief can show up physically as well. You know, that there are well documented, physical symptoms that people can be experiencing as a result of unresolved grief. So there are ways to deal with it. And yeah, I'm more than happy to share that, because it mainly came from my own experience of just thinking, I need some help with this. I need some help to try and deal with this better.
Yeah. And I'd love to have Vic back on our show again, because we are going to, I think we'll plan something in a few months around, if you had one day left, what would you say? I'd really like to cover that topic. Not that we're all given that day, be allowed to do that, but it gives you a different perspective on things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd be an honour. It'd be great to be back if you would have me back to talk about that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
So that's great. So great. You had so many great tips and tricks for everybody. I'm so happy that I had you on our show. So thank you very, very much for coming on. Very grateful for you.
Oh, thank you. It's been great. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. So take a moment and subscribe to our channel, everybody, because we're going to get the handout again right down here below. Make sure you click on that subscribe button, tick on that bell, because when you are thinking about someone special today, when you're watching this show, make sure that you reach out to them. Phone, text, FaceTime, Zoom, whatever, personally show up at their door. But make sure that you reach out to them today and tell them how much you love and care about, because you don't know what tomorrow might bring. So stay tuned for our podcast and our live streams. We have great conversations with some of the most interesting and accomplished people in the world today, just like beautiful Victoria. I think you'll be entertained, informed, and hope that we've inspired and motivated you to think about, what you might say or how you're going to take on that challenge with a family in someone's passing or someone's sickness, for that matter, because you also need a unique plan, and no one is Superman in this world. Nobody. There's that saying, nobody gets out of this alive. So expect the unexpected. Thank you again to all of our beautiful listeners. Now that we've had a second successful season, that's a whole lot of S's to say. We've make sure that you've come back and are one of our great listeners to our show. We are on YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook. So many things. You'll find us everywhere. We have a Facebook group community as well that you are welcome to join. And thank you for sharing this time with us. I always end our show, Vic, with Carol Burnett. Do you know who Carol Burnett is?
I do, of course.
Was she popular in the UK too?
A little bit, yeah. We know of her mainly from having your TV over here, so yeah.
Okay. Carol Burnett was a beautiful, lovely person that, and still is, and I love her. I love her humor and her lightness of situations. She always lightened the load, so to speak. So I'm so glad we had this time together just to have a laugh or sing a song. Seems we just get started, and before you know it, comes a time we have to say so long. So long, everybody. Be kind, stay safe, expect the unexpected. Sending lots of love. Bye, everybody.